Well, it's kind of strange that to find my good neighbor, I have to come all the way to the Malcolm Gishad Park in this picturesque setting to have a nice little chit chat. Steve, good afternoon.
Well, it's a lovely place. Second time for the week. The ambience is great and it's in pristine shape. So why not here?
Beautiful setting. Now, Steve, it all started way back when. You may not know this. Maybe this is the first time I'm telling you this. But it was really nice hearing a certain Stevenson Manners perched up in a mango tree in Hull Ground. And it was Jeffrey Boycott getting ready to take strike from Michael Holding. And it was being bellowed from a mango tree. And I think that kind of inspired me to want to do some commentary as well. Do you remember those days?
Definitely perched in trees. We didn't have television plenty in those days. And so we created our own fun. And of course, there were commentators, the English guys. You'd wake up early in the morning to hear Roy Lawrence from Jamaica and Tony Cozier. And I wanted to think that I could emulate them in describing the glorious game of cricket.
And to be honest, Steve, you did a marvelous job because your voice echoed all over Hull Ground. And that time there were no microphones. Microphones were not yet invented. But your voice was echoing from the top of that mango tree. And it sounded like an exciting game. You didn't see the cricketers, but it sounded like an exciting game.
My brother Orville and myself, we played in the backyard. He sometimes Australia, me sometimes the West Indies. And we created our own fun. That was something about our days of growing up. I wonder often what the young people find fun doing. But we had a glorious young days, we can say, and growing up in Hull Ground was pure fun. Playing cricket in the streets and in the pastures.
Talk to me about, as we mentioned, cricket. Talk to me about this wonderful book that we are so much anticipating, Steve. Remind me of the title of the book again.
Well, the name is The Father, Son, and Offsprings.
Now, normally, from a religious background, it would be Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. When you were coming up with that title, what was going through your mind?
Well, this is a story which I think had to be written. So it's been in the works for a long time, for years actually, in earnest 2.5 years, and it was conceived on the lockdown. Those days when we were at home for 7 straight days and couldn't go out.
For the COVID.
For COVID, my mind was at work. And so I was doing a lot of the groundwork for this book. And then it was in the last 6-7 months that the title emerged. So I didn't have the title at first. I did the body of work, the research, and then the title to me became a natural fit. Because what I found out is that the game of cricket had some foundation members in different parts of the island. In Gingerland it was George Cannon Hanley, for instance.
Okay.
Over in St. James, it was teacher John Cole. In St. Thomas's, it was 2 Parry boys, David and Nehemiah, and a man called Fred Clark. And in Brown Hill, it was Teddy Slack, Edmund Teddy Slack, the father of Mikey. They had a little bit more resources than the normal person. So instead of using the coconut bat and any piece of wood we could find in the backyard, and young breadfruit and stuff like that.
And soreen.
And soreen they could produce because they had a little bit more money. In Charlestown, which was the point from which the game radiated outwards, there was a man called Johnny Howell, father of Spencer Howell, grandfather of Tessa Howell, great-grandfather of Daddy Play Howell. And he did a lot for the game after World War II. He still remains Nevis' longest serving captain, being captain from 1939 to 1951. So he owned a place on Main Street, now called the Heritage Plaza, but he owned a lumber yard, and he had, as I said, more resources than the average person. And he was an older person too, played for Nevis first in 1926. if he were alive, he would have been in his 121st year. So it's a way back. But he really is the father of Nevis cricket. The pavilion at the E.T. Willett Park is named after him because he was the first captain of Nevis in 1949. And by the way, his son Spencer Howell, at 18, also played in that team when we first played in the Leeward Islands tournament in Antigua, our first match being against
So
Montserrat.
father, son played in that first.
Father, son played in that first team.
Okay.
But that's not where the son comes from.
Got you.
Now, once he led Nevis for the first time into Leeward Islands tournament, he was in his late 40s, so he didn't play for much longer. And so he yielded the captaincy and, in fact, went into politics. So there were a number of persons who followed in his pioneering role. One of the things he did was to take the game to countries which were non-traditionally cricketing countries. St. Martin, Statia, St. Thomas,
Okay.
Tortola, etc. So he helped grow the game in the region. But after him came people like Ted Hobson. He was the first Division to play on a Leeward Islands team. He was the first Division in 1953 to try out in front of the West Indies selectors. They thought he was that good that they
Yeah.
took him to Guyana.
I understand he was a really good wicket-keeper batsman.
Well, I wouldn't have seen him. But
Yeah,
the
that's what I
story
heard.
is
Yeah. Mhm.
that he was a wicket-keeper batsman and he must have shown some promise. In 1950, he toured Bermuda in what was called the Goodwill Series. And then you're coming up the line in 1955, his brother, Charlie Hobson, led Nevis to the first championship in Leeward Islands tournament right here at Grove Park. And then you had other people like Harold Walters, 1965 in March. He became the first Leeward Islander to take 5 wickets in an innings.
Okay.
That against Bobby Simpson's Australians.
team, yeah.
1968, Livingston Sargent became the first Leeward Islander to make 100 at the Antigua Recreation Ground or the St. John's Ground,
Was that against a tour in England team?
the MCC.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things happened along the way, which made Nevis an outstanding country in terms of the game of cricket. And then, of course, in 1969 came this gentleman, El Camido Tonito Willett, at age 16, playing against the said Montserrat for the first time in Antigua. Of course, he went on to play for the Leeward Islands and the Combined Islands in 71 and eventually became the first player from the Leeward Islands to play for the West Indies.
Steve,
Just
Steve-
think about it for a minute, Curtis.
Yes, Steve,
Mm.
stick a pen. Before you continue there, I'm making a connect.
Mhm.
Tell me if it's a correct connect. Even you mentioned Willett in 1969,
Mhm.
but I want to go back to Mr. Johnny Howell. Didn't Willett work at his place?
I don't know that for sure.
think
I
I
know
heard
Derek
that.
Parry.
Oh, Derek Parry worked
I know
there.
Derek
Okay,
Parry worked
okay,
there for sure. But
Okay.
that's another thing that he did.
Okay.
Once he
Employed some of the
realized that
guys.
people had talent, he nurtured a lot of talent.
Okay.
And look at where we are with the E.T. Willett Park at the present. It's not a great spectacle.
No.
But there were days when the park wasn't fenced. They used to plat coconut branches from the bad bugs during games, for instance. And so he used his galvanized and his wood and his nail to do whatever was necessary at the park. But back to Willett, 1969, and eventually 1973, becoming the first Leeward Islander to play Test cricket for the West Indies. Just think about it. Leeward Islands tournament started in 1913 with St. Kitts, Nevis, Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Montserrat, and Dominica.
Okay.
Dominica was a Leeward Island until 1940. And it is partly because they left that Nevis sort of got into the fold in 1949. But think about it, Antigua took 61 years before they could put a player on the West Indies side. We took 24 years before we became the first. At the time, Willett was the 8th youngest player ever to play for the West
At
Indies.
age 19.
Yes. And he was the 4th black person to make the team as a teenager. One of them, of course, being Gary Sobers. The player who had made the side before him as a teenager was a fellow from St. Vincent called Alfie Roberts, Alfonso Alfie Roberts. Played one match in New Zealand in 1956, and I think it was the same series in which New Zealand won their first match after 26 years of trying. You know, cricket was more sporadic in those days, etc., etc. But he became the first person from the so-called smaller islands. But Willett did that at age 19. And just think about it. This tiny island, Nevis, 36 square miles, at the last census, 11,117 people, is the greatest or almost the greatest piece of cricketing real estate in the world. In the Caribbean region, only two countries, of course, Barbados is the Mecca, only 166 square miles, and has produced more players per square mile than many other places in the world. But of course, it's very densely populated, around 300,000. The other place is Port Morant in Berbice, Guyana. They have produced a lot of cricketers. But this tiny dot, 36 square miles, produced the gem. 50 years now, of course, next month, March 9th, will be 50 years since he did that. And he gave Nevis great visibility. Before that, when we were going to school, we were taught about Alexander Hamilton. The Iron Shed said, "Welcome to Nevis, the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton." Or it told us about Horatio Nelson. But what Willett did was to give us visibility, similar to what Pele did in Brazil, which is a very stratified society, a class society. So Willett is the son.
Okay, so Willett is the son, and Johnny Howell is the father. But then, if you could put a spin on that as well, during these years of cricket, Nevis has produced some father-son combinations as well.
Yes, of course, there's been the Willett.
Could you list a few?
Well, just off the top of my head, there has been Willett and Tonito and Akito, Ronald Powell and Ross. There is Harold Walters, and of course,
Oscar.
We must pay homage to his family. Yeah. They've lost him they've lost both of them, both parents.
The wife has gone
in the last 2 years or so. So there have been many father-son combinations.
Is that mentioned in the book?
That's
not really. That's not the focus.
Necessarily the focus there.
Right.
And of course the offsprings, because of what Willett did. We had Derek Parry, Keith Atherton, Stuart Williams.
Ronaldo Morton.
Well, let's list them in order.
Okay.
Carl Tuckett for one match, Ronaldo Morton, and Kyron Powell. So we have produced 7 international cricketers. Think about it. Our sister islands and St. Kitts, and this is not a knock on them.
Right.
68 square miles, they've yet to produce one.
Over 40-something thousand people.
Antigua, 3 times our size, 108 square miles. You added Barbuda to that, 170. They have not tripled, quadrupled what we have done. So what Willett did in leading others along the path has been amazing. And we have done it with very weak infrastructure, cricketing infrastructure, and pretty not totally professional institutions. I mean, when you think about the Barbados Cricket Association and the Queen's Park Club in Jamaica, we have had some outstanding presidents along the way. But we didn't even have a secretariat, for instance.
That is true.
And so we have punched above our weight.
Apart from that, Steve, as you mentioned about the professional setup in some of these other islands, when my son got a cricket scholarship to Trinidad, and he played in Trinidad, I was shocked when he wrote back home and said, "I'm playing some club cricket and getting paid."
Yeah.
I mean, the setup there is so different. I'm talking about, when you talk about club cricket here in Nevis, I mean, you're just playing club cricket.
You're playing club cricket.
But when you play club cricket up there, they level the standard, the professionalism, and then they get paid. He was shocked. I mean, I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
You know? So, Steve, if these are the offsprings, Parry and so on, then if Willett opened the door, then Sir Vivian and Sir Andy must be cousins.
Yeah, they followed in 1974 with, of course, Andy Roberts, March 5th, I think it was, 1974, at the same venue, Barbados, where different opposition, England, where Willett made his debut. And then later in the year, of course, Viv Richards went down to India. And in his second test match, made 192.
Because I think he made naught in his first.
He was small scores, very
yeah.
small scores.
But in his second, he made 192.
He announced himself to the world.
Yeah.
And so we have truly led the way. And I believe that we need to celebrate and commemorate. Now, I love this place. I suggested this venue to you because just on Monday we came here to celebrate Malcolm Gishard. It was announced that every day his holiday, his birthday, January 16th, will be celebrated, and that there will be a bronze statue erected here. Why not a bronze statue? I applaud that. Why not a bronze statue for Willett? That is long overdue.
Apart from that, Steve, I've long advocated, and I'm saying this now because I'm hoping that this interview reaches far and wide. There was a time that Barbados, because of the significant contributions of people like Sir Walcott and Worrell and so on, which one of them was the last living one? The one that probably died. All of them are dead now, right? All the 3Ws?
Yeah, Everton Weeks.
So
the father of David Morey died
was
2 years, about 2 years ago. Yeah.
Well, they gave him a brand new car some time back there. And I remember approaching TDC and saying, well,
I remember that well.
You remember that? And I said, look here, guys. If they're giving Weeks a car, what about El Camino Willett? I mean, he shouldn't be driving around in any shabby-looking car. Give the man a car. And, you know, they thought about it, and the best they did was brought it down to, I think, 30,000, which is a start. But when you look at what Antigua has done for Sir Vivian, I mean, I've written, I've talked, I know you have advocated as well. Willett should be Sir El Camino for starters. Willett should be a national hero for starters. Willett should maybe not get a government minister's salary like Sir Viv, but even a stipend for the rest of his life, Steve.
Well, I write about that in my book. St. Kitts Nevis is stuck in what I call paradigm paralysis. I mentioned that in my book. We've got 5 national heroes, and they're all politicians. Antigua, close by, have 6 national heroes. 3 are politicians, and 3 are regular people. Viv Richards, King Taki, who led a slavery rebellion in 1736, and Nellie Robinson, an educator. Why is it that there can be no reason why Willett is not yet named a national hero? And when I do things, I look to legacy. Something must come out of it. For instance, 2.5 years ago, the Christina Memorial. Our group was able to, the Christina commemoration, our group was able to advocate for a memorial in St. Kitts. Nevis has 2, St. Kitts has none. To his credit, Prime Minister Timothy Harris accepted that, and they built a memorial in St. Kitts at the Treasury Pier, but he lost office before he could commission it.
Okay.
I'm looking to see that happen August 1st. If at the end of this, Willett is not made a national hero, I said we have totally lost the plot. And Kim Collins as well.
Yeah,
so I look for legacy. I'll tell you something else. Lofton Brandy, I think, has been one of the best sports ministers we've had, along with Hensley Daniel. He was the one who opened the Sports Museum, March 29, 2005. I was fortunate to speak at that. And that museum helped tremendously in helping to do the research for this book. But I don't think it has been maximized. It opened in the Cotton Ginnery Mall. Then they said they were going to renovate, so it will be moved temporarily. It spent 7 years plus in a bad location, upstairs the Arthur Evelyn building. I think it should be on the ground level. And it's now in the Edith L. Solomon building. But it is now in its smallest space that he has ever occupied, and it should be expanding. There's a lot of memorabilia out there. For instance, Zumbai Digger, he has Zola, the
Yeah.
first mascot Nevis ever had.
Exactly.
And I've been talking about him,
I
to
don't know if
him.
you remember, Steve,
Mhm.
when I had anything to do with that sports museum, we used to have a sports museum year,
Mhm.
once a year. We invited school
Yeah,
children.
yeah, I remember that.
And Zola was a guest
Mhm.
a couple of years.
Yeah.
But Zumbai said, make sure you bring back.
Yes, he
Zumbai
loves
not
it.
releasing Zola.
No,
He
but
said,
I'm
bring it
telling
back
you,
to
I'm
the bar.
telling you, he has given me the commitment. If the right approaches are made, and I've already led the way on that, Zumbai will, not Zumbai, but Zola will become a permanent resident at the Sports Museum.
Okay.
Spencer Howell, who tutored me on the early days of cricket since he played in the first team, has a lot of cricketing stuff in his cabinet, and I spoke to him and I spoke to Tessa
Tessa.
on many occasions, as recently as 2 weeks ago, about moving the memorabilia
To
he
the
has
sports museum.
to the Sports
But
Museum.
lack of space.
Well, essentially, I would like to see, of course, the Premier promised the 13 million upgrade for Grove Park. And I would like to see that executed. That's been 3 years now. And on the ground floor of a new pavilion, that is where I would love to see the Sports Museum. But the point I'm making is that there is a lot of memorabilia out there sitting in people's homes that
That's
should
right.
rightfully find themselves in the Sports Museum, which can become a big sporting attraction. I noticed Randy Tours, it's a joy to listen to his men taking people into Grove Park and telling the story of Willett, first Leeward Islander, but there should be a museum there. Now, I'll tell you something. One of the things I addressed in my book is apartheid in South Africa. 2 of our players have been on the cutting edge of apartheid. It is a little discussed subject in Nevis and in the Caribbean as a whole, even though the first tour in 82, 83, that's 40 years ago. In my book, I discuss the good, the bad, and the
The
ugly,
ugly.
because I believe we should. So Derek Parry, for instance, was part of the rebel teams in 82, 83, and 84. I tried to explore whether the West Indians going there helped to bring down apartheid faster because of their presence.
Okay.
C.L.R. James, in his book Beyond the Boundary, calls it constructive engagement.
Okay.
I am fully aware that's not why they went to South Africa, but I believe that it propelled the fall of apartheid.
Okay.
Now, fast forward 15 years. The first ever team after apartheid had ended in May of 1994 to tour South Africa was the West Indies. They wanted the West Indies because we were black, because we had had a black president. We had demonstrated in those 83 tours, 83, 84 tours, that we can absolutely play the game and inspire people. And so the West Indies was the first team. Stuart Williams was a member of that team. You would recall that that team was held up at the Excelsior Hotel at Heathrow Airport because the captain and vice captain, Brian Lara and Carl Hooper, revolted and got the other players to join them. Clive Lloyd, the manager of the team, was already in South Africa laying the groundwork for this historic tour. He had to board a British Airways flight, fly back to England with Ali Baker to negotiate with the West Indian players. An anti-apartheid professor in South Africa, knowing that it was important to the new democracy to have a West Indies team on show, wrote a letter, took it to Nelson Mandela, and asked him to sign it, begging the West Indian players not to cancel the tour. Pat Russo was the president. He had to fly to England as well. Stuart Williams would have a letter, well, I hope he does still, because they hand-delivered a letter to each of the
player.
West Indian players, signed by Nelson Mandela, saying, please, make this tour come forward. Now, Stuart Williams is perhaps the only Nevisian who has ever gotten a letter from Nelson Mandela. I would have loved to,
See that letter? You must
well, not only see that letter, I was thinking even shake the hand of Nelson Mandela. I don't know what Stuart would have done with that letter, but you imagine what that would mean if that letter
in the
found
sports
its
museum.
way in the sports museum. So one of the legacies I would like to see is that, and I'm going to make an appeal every show I appear on leading up to the launch of my book, that if you have things out there, it could be a cricket ball in which the West Indies, well, the Nevis bowled out St. Kitts in the 1984 Berridge Howell Trophy, for instance. One of the difficulties, because not even scorebooks you can find
Sure.
from going back a long time, because they have not become the property of a cricket association. I remember many years ago trying to find out something, and Ivor Sixten Walters, who had walked around cricket, took stuff from boxes under his bed.
Wow.
And I have found that there's a lot of stuff out there we can bring together and make that museum a very exciting place. That's one of the legacy items I would like to see.
Nice. And Steve, of course, that bronze statue of Willett somewhere so that everybody can see it. I mean, they do have something in the sports museum, but
Yeah.
I mean something in the public eye. When you go to Barbados, you drive a particular road and
Garfield
Sobers is
Sobers,
there.
Bosser
Somebody
is there, a
else,
freedom fighter.
I mean,
We
so
got to do better.
We got to do better.
We got to do
We gotta
better.
do better.
And I have already identified the picture which should be used. That picture when he received the gold jacket
Okay.
at the moorings in Tortola,
In Tortola,
is
yeah.
an absolute gem. Every time I see that picture, every time I post it, my eyes light up. If they're looking for a model,
This is it.
that is the picture.
You know, one of the sad things I've noticed, Steve. I don't think it's just happened in Nevis. People normally wait until people are dead,
Mhm.
and there's a song, a hymn which says, "Glorious things of thee are spoken." Um, that's when they talk about people, and they give them even posthumous awards. And
Mhm.
Steve,
Well,
that
that's
doesn't make sense. To
that's
me.
why
Why not do it when the guy's alive and well and in his right mind?
that's why one of the things I've never done, and I hope I never have to do, is a eulogy. I don't believe you should eulogize people when they're dead. And that's why I'm always posting about outstanding divisions. You have to give them flowers when they're living. Just think about it. Willett was 19 years going on 20. Willett is now on March 9th. He will be 53 days from being 70 on May 1st. The man has been contributing to this country for 50 years and more, because he played for Nevis at age 16. Bear in mind that of all the 7 cricketers, El Camino Willett is the only one who never attended secondary school. He played, of course, for the Charlestown Boys School under Stanford Boncamper, made the Leeward Nevis team as a 7th standard student, and of course played his cricket at places like Hammy Park and Boko Park. That's another good thing which Lofton Brandy tried to initiate, was to do a nursery. Long before you hear about these academies, he was talking about a nursery at Boko Park. And of course, at the turn of the century, he wanted to rename Government Road after Willett. West Hall was supposed to come here as president of the West Indies Cricket Board, but that was never happened. So those are the things I would like to see. Of course, Hensley Daniel, another outstanding sports minister, came later, and in July 28, 2010, renamed the E.T. Willett Grove Park, the E.T. Willett Park, and of course, under a project called Recasting Our Image, Our Society in the Image of Our Own People, we named things like the Netball Complex. There is Carl Tuckett Boulevard, Stuart Williams Drive, Ural Swanston Highway. And so there have been 2 of outstanding sports ministers who understand that we should celebrate and commemorate.
So, Steve, as we look forward to this book, tell us about the launch, and tell us about the cost, and tell us about availability. Where can persons get this wonderful book?
Well, February 6th has been the date chosen. There won't be a launch.
Okay.
There won't be a launch, but the book will become available on Amazon,
Amazon.
at that point in time.
Okay.
Um, a launch, I had previously thought to bring it out to coincide with March 9th. But I want every Nivision, every Kititian, every cricket-loving person to be able to have this book and to have read it by the time the commemoration comes around.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm launching it on that day. Well, launching it, releasing it, or publishing it on Amazon on that day. I chose February 6th for two reasons. I want to make El Camino Willett doubly happy because it's the birthday of his first son, Tonito Willett.
Okay.
I believe he will be 40. I think he was born in 1983. And the second reason why I'm launching it on February 6th or releasing it on February 6th is because Tonito shares a birth date with the legendary Bob Marley,
Okay.
who I regard as the greatest, shouldn't say musician, philosopher in my lifetime.
Okay.
In his song Get Up, Stand Up, he says, half the story has never been told. I think the story of Nevis cricket, despite the work that people like yourself, myself, Carlisle Powell, and others have done, and you need to be commended highly for what you've been doing all these years to keep the sport going and keeping people informed. But in a fulsome way, the story of Nevis cricket has never been told. I intend on that day, once I have a copy available, very small pre-order on hand, that I will present on that day the very first copy to El Camino Tonito Willett. I will not allow anybody except my family to see that book, not even my typesetter, Thelma Mills, not even my editor, Hansel Manners. The first person outside of the customs people, when I take it out of customs, will be presenting a book to El Camino Willett. And then on the evening of February 6th, the rest of the world will be able to access this book on Amazon. Now, you asked about availability. I have chosen to use Amazon because this is not just a Nevis book. This is a Nevis story.
International.
But it is written in a way that is, and so there have been two of outstanding sports ministers who understand that we should celebrate and commemorate.
So, Steve, as we look forward to this book, tell us about the launch and tell us about the cost and tell us about availability. Where can persons get this wonderful book?
Well, February 6th has been the date chosen. There won't be a launch.
Okay.
There won't be a launch, but the book will become available on Amazon, at that point in time.
Okay.
A launch, I had previously thought to bring it out to coincide with March 9th. But I want every Nivision, every Kititian, every cricket-loving person to be able to have this book and to have read it by the time the commemoration comes around.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm launching it on that day. Well, launching it, releasing it, or publishing it on Amazon on that day. I chose February 6th for two reasons. I want to make El Camino Willett doubly happy because it's the birthday of his first son, Tonito Willett.
Okay.
I believe he will be 40. I think he was born in 1983. And the second reason why I'm launching it on February 6th or releasing it on February 6th is because Tonito shares a birth date with the legendary Bob Marley,
Okay.
who I regard as the greatest, shouldn't say musician, philosopher in my lifetime.
Okay.
In his song Get Up, Stand Up, he says, half the story has never been told. I think the story of Nevis cricket, despite the work that people like yourself, myself, Carlisle Powell, and others have done, and you need to be commended highly for what you've been doing all these years to keep the sport going and keeping people informed. But in a fulsome way, the story of Nevis cricket has never been told. I intend on that day, once I have a copy available, very small pre-order on hand, that I will present on that day the very first copy to El Camido Tonito Willett. I will not allow anybody except my family to see that book, not even my typesetter, Thelma Mills, not even my editor, Hansel Manners. The first person outside of the customs people, when I take it out of customs, will be presenting a book to El Camido Willett. And then on the evening of February 6th, the rest of the world will be able to access this book on Amazon. Now, you asked about availability. I have chosen to use Amazon because this is not just a Nevis book. This is a Nevis story.
International.
But it is written in a way that it's a world
Far
view.
reaching.
You see Nevis in the context of being a part of the Federation, the smaller part of the Federation, but excelling more in cricket. In terms of getting the jump start on Antigua, which is 3-4 times our size, in the context of West Indies cricket and world cricket. I mentioned the apartheid era. Nevis was instrumental in that era. So I'm writing the book, or I have written the book, for a world audience.
Nice.
So in the first instance, and people yesterday when I made the post were already messaging me on Facebook Messenger, because they are in the habit of accessing books, dresses,
Via
phones
Amazon.
via Amazon. We do the same thing here. I guarantee you that, and I know a few people who have already ordered Harry's book Spear. They got it on Amazon.
Okay.
I know people who will order clothes for Interprimary. They do it on Amazon. So even though I would like personally to be able to be in a public square, be in a public place, and have books autographed for people, there is a very heavy cost
Got you.
of bringing in extra books.
Got you.
For instance, I'll give you a little bit of the math. I looked at 500 copies being brought in. It runs me in excess of $12,000.
Wow.
And when other costs of factoring would run me at $17,000
Wow.
before I have sold a single book.
Wow.
So I'm basically saying that for the onset, we're
Let's do it through Amazon.
going through Amazon so that Nevisians in the diaspora, Kititians, and the Roberts in Antigua or wherever
Everybody in
can
the
access this book.
Steve, I have one request of you though.
Mhm.
When you make that presentation to ELCO on the 6th of February, can you allow the camera to be present?
It will be. It will be a public event in a public place.
Okay.
I will notify you and other media houses to come there. Some of the things that I am doing outside of the book, the hashtag It's Been 50 Years. So for instance, I want you guys to come to talk to Willett about that experience 50 years ago. Now, the West Indies named its team for South Africa and Zimbabwe yesterday. In 1973, it didn't happen that way. El Camido Willett was playing for the Combined Islands.
And Alf Corriett,
No. Well, he is of two minds. I've
Okay.
spoken to him over the years.
Okay.
Alf Corriett, who
Was feeling on the
outstanding
boundary.
Montserrat cricketer. Willett's mind is a little vague on
Hazy.
this. But he was playing in St. Vincent, Arnos Vale, St. Vincent,
Against
and
Jamaica.
against Jamaica, and the news was announced on commentary.
Yeah, he said he
and-
saw the crowd just raising
Yeah,
up and
it
getting
was
excited.
it was announced on radio commentary, and even though he has mentioned Alf Corriett over the years, he kind of settled on Norbert Phillip.
Okay.
Norbert Phillip of Dominica, who also went on to play for the West Indies in around 1978. He was the one who ran in from the boundary to break the news to Willett and his exuberant teammates. Now, bear in mind, in 1973, Willett bowled more overs than any other bowler in the domestic competition. 208 overs and 2 balls, took 18 wickets at 23.77. The only man who beat him out was Lance Gibbs, who took 22 at 16.13. And he outdid Rafiq Jumedeen of Trinidad, who got 15 wickets at 32.93. So Willett did the work in 1973. And I think in this 70th year, we should be paying him dividends. I personally would like to see Willett get a trip back to Barbados to reminisce.
That
Or
would
a
be nice.
cruise,
Yeah.
of course, with Sandrine with him, who has been
Of
such
course.
a supporting partner.
Yeah.
And so we're appealing here, business places, reach out to Willett. Willett has been an exemplary figure. I don't think he has ever darkened the courtroom doors. I've never heard ill of him. And he deserves all the credit he can get. This year, I called for March 9th, 1973 to be declared Willett El Camido Tonito Willett Day. And we must celebrate in many ways.
Totally agreed, Steve. And as we wrap up, because the main focus now would be on Willett, see if you can run this package with me. A stipend monthly for the rest of his life. A brand new vehicle. No taxes paid, just like Sir Viv is getting in Antigua, for the rest of his life. The bronze statue. National hero. Sir El Camido Willett. And there was a time you advocated that a stand at the Warner Park be named in his honor.
Mhm.
And I remember some Kittitians were up in arms, but he's not even from St. Kitts. What is that to do with anything? How does my package sound?
It's a glorious packet. By the way, I don't believe in colonial relics such as Sir. I would
Okay.
never accept one,
Okay.
and so I wouldn't advocate for that. But I
Okay.
remember in 2005, can't remember if you were there, but over at the Marriott, I think it was, in the pre-Warner Park or in the developmental stage, journalists were invited to the Marriott on a Sunday afternoon. Ricky Skerritt was there, Charles Wilkin was there, and Prime Minister Denzel Douglas. And I raised the issue of one of the stands being named at Warner Park.
I remember that.
And of course, we know the way that
response, yeah.
people, well, they were tight-lipped, but that's not a bad idea at all.
Oh, it's a tremendous idea.
But we need to begin to do things to recognize. I think the commentary box is named after Paul Southwell.
Yeah.
So why not something after El Camido Willett?
And Steve, also, the place that has so many memories
Mhm.
that is named in honor of Willett could do with a big facelift.
Well, as I said, the Premier promised that in 2013 we will hold him, 2019 to spend $13 million. We will hold him to that. But let's not lose track of the fact that the book is called The Enchanting Story of Nevis Cricket, 1945, post-World War II to the present, and the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So Willett is, of course, a central figure. But
Father, Son, and offsprings.
an offspring. Did I say Holy Ghost? I'm waxing spiritual here. Maybe that was in the back of my mind.
I started with it, so
Uh-huh.
yeah.
But definitely, it looks at Nevis cricket at almost every angle you could think about. I even name a number one fan, somebody who I believe has done most to the game. There were two close persons
Miss Dorr?
I won't tell you. When you read it, you'll find out there are two persons, and they're both females who run
Zumba's mom is one.
who ran neck to neck. But the game has encompassed everybody. Now, let me tell you this. Cricket has not just been a game. It's been a lot more than that. Cricket has been an avenue for political and social dialogue, for
Bad
cultural expression and resistance. We talked about South Africa. Viv Richards offered $1 million or an open check to go there, and he resisted. So wherever sport is played, it is used for things which go beyond the game, things which go beyond the boundary. And so we look at it from every aspect. And I'll tell you this, why this project is proving to be a little costly is because Amazon puts a unit price to produce a book. It saves you the difficulty of having to go to a local publisher or
But
send
there's
it
a
to.
cost.
But there's a cost involved. My cost has exceeded, doubled some of the more recent costs in the Federation. Why? It is 201 pages. It is 22 chapters,
Lots of pictures.
but it has 100 pictures, and many of them are in
That's
color.
That's cost.
Sports, you have to have color because I'm
Exactly.
looking at the evolution.
Exactly.
So I have pictures from the 1940s where Alfred, not Alfred, he's mentioned in the book as well, another son of Johnny Howell. But Johnny Howell takes a team to St. Thomas and plays at the hospital ground. And the men are dressed in baggy pants, hard shoes, a floppy cap, hat, like the older people used to wear, and their pants held in place by a belt. Of course, that evolved into flannels in the 60s and 70s, and now you have colored clothing. We have moved from white ball, red ball, to white ball, to pink ball. And so we have some lovely pictures on the page called Remembering Ronaldo Morton, for instance, of when the first match played after he passed at Warner Park was dubbed Ronaldo Morton Day. And Kyle Mills, who wore number 30, donated his number 30 jersey to Ronaldo's wife, Lizelle. And so we have a lot of color in it. I couldn't go without that.
Steve, in terms of the memories, did you mention that incident with Sergeant Howell in Antigua? That's not a part of
You
it.
sure you haven't seen the book? That chapter,
Well,
I think it is chapter 4,
Okay.
which is called 1969 Revisited. It is one of the most historic years because Willett started in that year. And of course, the match was abandoned. The St. Kitts Antigua match was abandoned because Viv Richards was a rising star who went on not only to play for Antigua in cricket but in football, because Viv Richards made 3 ducks because the crowd revolted and said no Vivi, no match. And then in the final match of the season, Nevis was trying to beat Antigua in Antigua for the first time in the
They were doing
finals.
a good job of it.
And they were 186 for 2 with Alfred Howell on 86 and Livingston Sargent on 68,
68, okay.
when he was given out caught at bad pad, and they had to beat a hasty retreat to the pavilion.
And then Premier Bratcher had to get them out by helicopter.
Eugene Walwyn, who was president of the Nevis Cricket Association at that point in time, and also Attorney General of St. Kitts Nevis, and at that point, Nevis's most powerful person had to go through Robert Bradshaw to get the Nevis team out of
there
Antigua,
safely.
because Antigua thought that they were bringing the shield to Nevis. So that is covered as well. I've covered it from every angle. And by the way, on that Friday afternoon when they came back to Nevis, marked the first ever motorcade in the history of Nevis.
Okay.
A sports-related motorcade which left from the Bambouche Airport, went through Cotton Ground since Livingston Sargent was a hero, ended up at Grove Park. We covered this thing of Nevis cricket 1949 to 2023, like the tiles on your floor
That's brilliant.
cover the floor. So this is a collector's item.
and
Everybody must get it.
Everybody must get a copy. How much, Steve?
The price has not been set.
Okay. Something like $200. That's
Amazon also recommends a lower level price,
okay.
and the highest price you can go. But setting the price
It's
depends on you.
okay.
So there are a number of factors that my people are now crunching the figures. Whatever it is, It is nothing that the people of Nevis and
Can't
the
afford.
people of the world cannot afford.
Okay.
I've said before, any Nevisian and any Kittian who doesn't get a copy of this book is unpatriotic.
Okay. And Steve, as we wrap up, do you remember? I don't know if it's in your book, but I'm sure you would have been at Grove Park then. I think it was Antigua as well, and it was an Antigua umpire,
Mhm.
and there was a controversial decision that brought the game to a premature end. I remember the whole Nevis crowd in front of the pavilion. I remember the crowd following the team down to Slacks Hotel. What was his name there?
Austin Hotel?
Austin Hotel. I
Mhm.
remember people all in front of Austin Hotel. You remember that incident?
No, I don't.
You don't remember that?
Strangely,
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
What I do remember is a Sunday in 1971, and that is captured in the book as well.
When Willie bowled out Monster?
When we were, Orville and myself, at the Gingerland Methodist Church, very cheekily, with a Philips radio with the wire, single wire,
That's right in church.
right
To
up
your
in the
slave
church.
And listening.
And we were listening to cricket. Every minute he would put the earpiece into my ear. And our daddy had said that he will take us in his truck to Grove Park after lunch. And we weren't studying the minister much. Willett was 8 for 29. None for
29.
None for 29 at lunch with Jim Allen, along with Coriat, of course, Montserrat's best ever batsman. And Willett ended up that afternoon taking 8 wickets for,
For
2 runs. 8 wickets for 2 runs, ending with 8 for 31. It has never been repeated. In fact, I've scoured all the cricket magazines, cricket info, and I've come up with 2 examples. Lance Gibbs did something similar against India in 1962. That's quoted in my book. And of course, Curtly Ambrose taking 7 for 1.
Yeah.
What Willett did on that Sunday in 1971,
Pass remarkable.
as a matter of fact, in those days, players and spectators sat in the same pavilion, the wooden section of it. And cheeky as I was, I went up into the pavilion to get close to the players and happened to see the Monstration captain, Cubby Jemmott, come back to the pavilion with tears in his eyes because Willett totally demolished Montserrat.
Bamboozled them that afternoon.
One of the persons who was on the Montserrat side is Mr. Basil Morgan, who went on, I believe he went before the Antiguan umpire to become the first, or was it Andrew Weeks? But he
Yeah,
was one of
probably,
the
yeah.
earliest umpires from the Leeward Islands. And he has already told me weeks ago that he's coming to Nevis for the
For the
commemoration.
occasion. Nice.
As a matter of fact, on March 9th, I am in the process of planning a 2-hour program starting at 10 o'clock, the time when cricket matches started then, and I think probably still, maybe they go a little earlier, and lasting for 2 hours. So we are going to invite some very important figures to join us on that program. One person we are working on is Reds Pereira of
Okay.
St. Lucia.
Okay.
He, of course, made his debut in 1971 as a test commentator, so he was 2 years in, and so he would have been around
When Willett made his debut.
when Willett made his debut. He's now in his mid-80s almost.
Yeah. But
And
still
of-
very alert.
Yeah, of course, Tony Cozier passed in 2016, so we can't have him. So we are working to have him. Willett, of course, we will have in the studio for the full 2 hours. Basil Morgan, if he's here, he will join us in the studio, if not by telephone, but he has promised me that he's
Yeah.
coming to Nevis. And people will have an opportunity to call in. We'll have a section called Where Were You? Where were you when the news came in? It was a Sunday. Wellington Paris, who has followed cricket very well, told me he was driving in the area where the roundabout is, and that ZIZ switched from religious broadcasting on a Sunday
To make a
afternoon
grand
to
announcement.
an impromptu call-in program. So I want to hear from people like Joseph Parry, of course, a former president of the Nevis Cricket Association and a Leaker representative to the West Indies board. So we're going to, Andy Roberts, if he's here, and I'm sure he was a roommate of Willett in the 1974 tour to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and India. So I'm sure he's going to come for that. Both of them were honored in Tortola. And so we'd have him as well. And so that is something we're going to look forward to. We're going to commemorate Willett on that day and throughout 2023.
Well, Steve, I must tell you, commendations, because coming up with a book, coming up with even the idea, it's a lot of sacrifice, it's a lot of work. I mean, I do a lot of writing, but not that kind of writing. I mean, that's a serious book. And I must commend you highly, and it should be used maybe later down as a textbook in the school, because that's history, that's cricket in history.
It covers, it covers the whole gamut. As you said, it's a lot of work. And we bear in mind that Cricket Info didn't come on board until 1993, and so just 30 years in the making. So digging up records from 1973 and beyond. Thank God that we had Tony Cozier, who wrote Cricket Annuals over the years, and that has been a good tracking point. The Nevis history is not well documented. As I said, you couldn't even find score books.
Well, previously. Let's say now it is.
Well, I
With
mean,
your
in
work.
So there are a number of people who came into play. Trevor Parry, of course,
one of the finest scorers in the world.
Yes, he is. He's an absolute gem. Of course, as I said, the Museum of Nevis History. Thelma Mills, she was a person who worked with me. Hansel Manners, he's been through 2 books, so he mentored me through this process. And you can't forget family. Brenda must have wondered what was happening to me over the last 2 years. I work by instinct. I drive along and ideas come to my head and I have to get to my computer.
Notes,
at nights, I jump up in the middle of the night because I have to commit something to paper or the computer.
And the best time to work, Steve, is when everybody else is sleeping.
So she's stuck with me. And of course, with all the young people stuff that is necessary to do something like this and take this world stage. My 2 daughters have given me a lot of technical support, and my son, who spent the last 3 weeks with us and just went back to his base in San Diego, California, is a videographer in his own right and is putting together a promotional video for me, which will also be launched on that weekend.
Nice.
So I'm telling everybody, keep your eyes on October 4th, when I'll be on the good old days. Keep your eyes on Saturday, Sunday, and of course Monday. And once the book gets launched, I likely will be on Sportsmax in Jamaica. So I'm going to spread the word around the world.
Beautiful. Well, Steve, again, congratulations. And folks, I'm urging you, get a copy of this book. It's history. It's Nevis cricket in history, like you'll never get it again, ever. And we want to thank Steve so much for the wonderful research, the wonderful work he has done. And no, Steve, you're not doing it for profit, but I do hope in the long term that something would spill off as well. That you could buy a new house and a new car.
Well, Harry's book broke all the records on the first day. Sold 1.4 million, going past Obama's book a few years ago, I think in 2019, selling 800,000. That's not going to happen here.
You never know.
I'm gratified in knowing that I've documented something that long needed documenting, and which Nevisians, cricket lovers everywhere should treasure. On that same weekend, I'm going to announce 3 persons to whom I'm dedicating this book, and they're all females.
Okay.
It is dedicated to cricket lovers everywhere. It is dedicated to the father. It is dedicated to the son.
And the
it is the offspring. But beyond that, there are 3 very special people to whom I will dedicate this book. So stay tuned. And Curtis, while we wrap up, let me say, me and Murchie talk about this all the time, of the work that you do over the years in sport, in cricket. Others have played their part. But nobody, absolutely nobody, has done the body of work that you have done for what, nearly 30 years, maybe more, starting with our days at TBN, Trinity Broadcasting, You have been one faithful servant to sport and to cricket, and I commend you highly.
Thank you, Steve. The commendations are mutual. And guess what?
Mhm.
Both of us have a legacy in Hullgrown.
We're
I think that's
Hullgrown-
significant.
We're Hullgrown boys. It must be in the water. And our names end with or begin with the letter M.
Yeah, significant.
Manners and Morton.
Morton.
It's been nice talking with you.